Assalamu alaikum, namaste, sat sri akal, across the border podcasts are back. It's an honor. हमारी कोई कोविड के दौरान 2-3 साल पहले गुफ्तगू हुई थी और उसके बाद से अमन की आशा तो खत्म हो गई है, लेकिन हमारे दिल में अब तक जाग रही हैं. अभिनंदन सेखरी इज हियर विद अस. ही इज द को-फाउंडर ऑफ न्यूज लॉन्ड्री. उससे पहले स्मॉल स्क्रीन के भी को-फाउंडर थे. प्रोडक्शन में रह चुके हैं, सैटायर करते हैं, प्रोड्यूस करते हैं, न्यूज करते हैं. दैट्स व्हाट प्राइमरीली वी विल बी डिस्कसिंग टुडे. बट फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, कैसे हैं सर?
Very well, Shehzad. Thank you so much. A pleasure to be on your podcast, and all good things to you. Like I told you, my co-founder is a big fan of your work. I don't consume it as much as he does, but yes, I have seen your work, and I must congratulate you for the kind of courage you show, the kind of things you talk about, how you talk about them, and I want to know that how do you still manage to get around being able to say what you say?
Let's just say there was a chance this podcast wouldn't have happened today. Let's just say that and end it there. I think people in both our countries who are watching this would be like, अगर बात कर रहे हो तो exchange ही कर लो ना. मुझे go to India बोलते हैं, आपको go to Pakistan
Good
बोलते हैं.
Pakistan.
I'm sure somebody in the comments are like, बस एक इधर उधर हो जाओ ना दोनों.
तो क्योंकि वहां पर भी इंसल्ट होता है, गो टू इंडिया.
यार एक्चुअली इतना नहीं है. मे बी दिस इज अ गुड प्लेस टू स्टार्ट. आई फील लाइक इन आवर नेशनल पॉलिटिक्स एटलीस्ट वो एक्सेप्टेंस आ गई है कि अब इंडिया से आप compete तो नहीं कर सकते. आर्म फोर्सेस में भी है, इकोनॉमी में भी है, गवर्नमेंट में भी है. सो दैट एंटी इंडिया रेटरिक is not as strong as maybe it was in its heyday of Kargil and the wars. अब इंडिया पे पॉलिटिक्स इतनी ज्यादा नहीं होती. सो इट्स बिट सरप्राइजिंग. या मे बी हमारे वही चीजें हाईलाइट होती हैं न्यूज की, वेयर पाकिस्तान इज मेंशन्ड इन इंडियन न्यूज. So to us, it feels like it's being mentioned a lot more. I don't know if that's true.
Well, no, it's not being mentioned in news a lot. I mean, it's still an issue now and then. It is politically expedient, to use it now and then. There is a history between our countries of the way it is. But it's interesting to know that now that acceptance, I mean, of course, one sometimes gets at that we are not competing with India because from the economic military might, it's in a different zone. And I think there are many lessons for both to learn on this, but I'm not sure if anyone's going to learn those lessons. But I think the go to Pakistan kind of insult is still very much a mainstream thing. Any that the anti-Muslim rhetoric is at an all-time high that I'm going to be 50 next year and I've been in news since 20. I don't remember that rhetoric. I mean, that there were patches like, during a certain time it was big in Maharashtra, during a certain time it was big in Gujarat, during a certain time it was big in UP. But the general, there were pockets of this extreme anti-Muslim rhetoric, but it didn't have the kind of pervasiveness across the country as it does now. So in that context, if you're to stand up for a minority or you're to say anything, the go to Pakistan is still it's a well used and dependable fallback option for people who can't come up with anything else.
Used as a conspiracy theory in Pakistan. The Jarwala incident happened just a couple of days ago. And I think the IG said कि कोई raw से links हैं. तो वो जब security lapse होता है आप बोल तो देते हैं. But I don't think anybody is getting votes on that at this point. वो anti-Americans इमरान खान ने किया था. That was much more populous, much stronger than anything anti-India that a political party can use now to get.
Yeah, but I know you've called me on your podcast, but I had one question, because I don't so often get to talk to people from Pakistan, especially people as outspoken as you. Because I was telling you, I saw your podcast in which you've actually discussed why Pakistan did not live up to whatever it could have, the potential, etc. On the economic might, India and Pakistan, you've done one. There was another wonderful young articulate man on that podcast with you. Um, uh,
Right.
Sorry, what's his name?
Zair Yunus?
I don't remember the name, but I remember that conversation. It was, I mean, I was a little surprised by how honestly and frankly you could discuss that without any fear of repercussion. For example, if one was to take that kind of position in a media, a podcast here, even people who are very well-meaning would hold back because one can't acknowledge that we are not good enough on X. Or if I was to say that, look, recently there was the attack on churches and some Christians in Pakistan. I think your Chief Justice went there himself. Many of your film stars tweeted that this is disgusting and stuff like that. Um, so on, that Pakistani film stars are more outspoken about attacks on minorities. If someone were to say that, I'm in a shit house with anyone, so I don't care. So I'm not the typical person. But even people, well-meaning people who want to kind of have a space and cannot come out and so discuss honestly that X is better than us at Y. Yet you did that on the economic might and the general development in India. You face no pushback. You don't face any, even by well-meaning people, that the national pride. How can you do that? How? There's no pushback.
We have barely over 100,000 subscribers, so we're very niche. We're not a mainstream TV channel, so maybe we're not reaching out to the masses where we would get that pushback. But no, essentially no. We've been doing a few of these podcasts where we're dissecting history, which we've gone even further, where we're discussing the role of our founders, the mistakes they might have made, the issues initially that arose, and how they were dealt with. There's been a bit more pushback over that because it's along the lines of what's the point of revisiting history? It won't help us today. But in terms of the mistakes we're making today, there is a lot more anti-state sentiment in Pakistan these days, and it's a lot more acceptable. So some of the things which are said by supporters of one of our most popular parties, PTI, things we say seem mild in comparison because at least we're doing it academically. There's wide abuse online against state institutions. I won't say that's acceptable, but I do feel it's happening so often that there's only so much they can curb down. Not to undermine the attacks on civil liberties in Pakistan, which are happening these days, where people are being picked up and people are being arrested. So that threat always looms large over you, but one must be brave. I guess I think that's a mantra both of us hold true.
And but Jinnah still out of bounds. You can't discuss Jinnah with
No, no,
honesty.
we've had Ishtaq Ahmed on the podcast 2 times. His book on Jinnah was pretty much launched on our podcast. We just did a podcast with Faisal Badaij where we discussed Jinnah. We just did a podcast with Adil Afzal where we discussed the two nation theory. So we've had Parvez Boy come and he's discussed his new book. So that, pretty much nothing is out of bounds at this point.
I see. Okay. All right.
Yeah, but I
Interesting.
mean, you're taking the risk every single time you do it. गालियां खाने की आदत हो गई है तो उसमें ज्यादा टेंशन अब लेता नहीं हूँ.
No, but here you can abuse Bapu and still be uh, in the Lok Sabha. You can be a member of parliament, and it's very fashionable to abuse Bapu right now. So,
हाँ, ये भी बड़ा
because,
interesting.
I mean, the one trip I've made to Pakistan, one can be critical of a lot of things. I still thought that Jinnah's out of bounds. You can't make fun of him
You
without
can't
repercussion.
abuse and you can't make fun of him, but you can discuss, like I've discussed multiple times, that he went to East Pakistan and he said your national language will be Urdu. And I've discussed the repercussions of that and how that sparked the Bengal language movement that led to the creation of Bangladesh. You can discuss it like that. You can't outright abuse him. I think that you'll get an FIR if you outright start abusing him. In terms of Gandhi, why is this revisionist history happening? Because we did some podcasts, we were praising them, and there were a lot of comments were like, "ये देखो पाकिस्तानी तारीफ कर रहे हैं, हम तो गालियां देते हैं." What is this changing narrative on Gandhi in India?
Well, I mean, it is. I'm still learning more and more. In fact, I'm reading this really good book on Vajpayee and the Hindu right by a former colleague actually. Book is called Vajpayee: The Ascent of the Hindu Right, 1924 to 1977. It's been written by Abhishek Chaudhary. He is a former colleague at Newslaundry. I'm learning a lot more. The hatred of Bapu is not a new thing, actually, in at least some very traditional RSS kind of mind ideologues. The more I read now of non-fiction from credible authors, it was always there big time. Bapu was someone they really despised. And I think the mistake that we made early on in India, I mean, you can tell us what do you think the mistakes that you made, that we kind of glossed over that there were people who really despised Bapu. And I think it should have been taught in history like everything else. Like, one shouldn't finish school thinking that the whole country loved Bapu. Even while Bapu was fasting, I went to Calcutta, there were dharnas saying that let the old man die. That did happen. There are, historical accounts of this from credible people have written about this. And I think the fact that we were not ever taught that is the problem, which is why now it's coming back with this venom and viciousness, whereas it could have been countered earlier in more effective ways. So I think it's not new, but the voice of those who always hated him now is loud and is buland. People like that have a carte blanche in the kind of the impunity with which they can act. Many people of that disposition are elected and given tickets. Many people of that disposition, although are completely illiterate and ignorant on matters of pedagogy and uh, what do you call education, are on panels advising what courses should be studied. So those people are always there. Now they have the microphone. I think that's the difference. It's not new in that sense.
In terms of there's academic work. There's a book which Ali Osman Kasmi has edited called Muslims Against Muslim League. You can academically study what happened, how it happened, but in terms of nation building, you're always building heroes which may not stand up to the image that you create. Martin Luther King has faced accusations of being a womanizer, but that does not stand, or that does not maybe lower his credence as a leader of the civil rights movement. Or
Sure.
even if we talk about the American founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner, but he goes ahead and says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that
Mm.
gets projected, and somehow that is internalized as the image of an American, of a free person. So, in terms of nation building, the image of Gandhi that's been projected, which may ignore some things he did in South Africa, some things he said. Uh, what's your take on such projection of heroes uh, in an effort to build the nation?
So, I mean, I must first, give a disclosure that Bapu is my hero. Just in my office opposite, where you can't see, there is a poster of his with text which says disobey below that. Of course, people who walk into my office and people who I've just hired look at it and say, "So, do you want us to disobey?" I'm like, "Dude, there's a context to that poster." But there's one right here. A friend of mine had done. That's Bapu. So you'll see Bapu everywhere in my office and in my house. Having said that, I think he was a flawed man, like all people are. But as a man, he was the wisest and smartest and greatest who has ever walked the earth, in my view. And I just was giving this example. Last week, we recorded a podcast with his great grandson, Rajmohan Gandhi, who was prevented from going to the Azad Maidan. Every year, they have August Kranti, they do a commemoration. This year, the police did not allow him to move. He says the first time it's happened. He's a wonderful man, his great grandson. And I asked him, because there is this podcast which I must recommend to you if you haven't already heard it, which has one episode is on this Martin Luther King, that march where that dog. It's called "The Rest Is History." This one, have you heard this? Oh man, it has one episode on Martin Luther King. You must listen to it. So I think you're right. Martin Luther King not just was he known as a womanizer. They are talking about how the plans were being made for that march, and the women were just there to make sandwiches. It was very sexist. In fact, one of the presenters says that the spin-off of the feminist movement was also came from this civil liberties and civil rights because the women just didn't have a role there. And he was asked that should we not have children lead that march because they knew they're white officers with those big Alsatian dogs. He says because kids are at risk because they're 14, 15-year-old kids. And Martin Luther King says, no, a dog attacking us is not going to move the nation like a dog attacking a child. So one could say, oh my God, he put children in harm's way for his cause. And in this context, I had asked Rajmohan Gandhi that, Bapu, there's this dialogue in this film, Shah Rukh Khan, who I love, Rais, where he says, Baniye ka dimag aur Miyan Bhai ki daring. He plays this Gujarati Muslim drug lord. So I was like, Bapu had Baniye ka dimag and Mirabai ki daring, because he knew what would work. And do you think it always came from a position of idealism or good political opportunism? And Rajmohan was smart, astute and aware enough to say that Bapu knew politics, and that's why he, like, the Hindu Mahasabha got demolished in election. Like, Bapu was not, he did not inherit some throne, yeah, and he was not an outcome of a movement that started at a cadre based 100 years ago, where the person today is benefiting from that. He set up the movement, led it, and took it to level in his lifetime. So a, that is what I think he had. I think to kind of idolize them in a sense of giving them godlike status, I'm against, which is why I prefer calling him Bapu and not Mahatma, because that kind of gives him this above human level. I think Bapu is something personal. We love him like a Bapu, and he had his flaws. There's a very good documentary that I saw on Rasulan Bai several years ago, and there was a big Bai culture in Banaras, and these Bais were courtesans, and it wasn't considered. I mean, they weren't, you know, sex workers. They were artists, but it still wasn't considered, because they would sing to entertain. It wasn't considered an honorable profession. And when Bapu had asked for contributions, for money and through clothes and jewelry to fund the movement for independence, the Bais they had got together, and because they had money, they had access to wealthy people, they had contributed a significant amount. And Bapu had said, "I will not take from you, because you are not honorable women. We don't want to." And I thought that was not nice. It was a crappy thing to do. But that doesn't mean he wasn't an amazing man. He was a man who was a product of his times. He was sexist in his own way. I think Ba's full potential wasn't realized, because Bapu was a product of his time. It was all about Bapu, and Ba was like, you know, the supporting cast. And so he was a flawed man. I think, you know, the demonizing him is an outcome of making him a god. I think if you can have a scrutiny of our heroes in a fair way, it actually benefits society, and it prevents complete polarization. Although it hasn't prevented that in the US, I think American, historically and culturally, through the podcasts and all the stuff I consume, they can actually make films on dissect their leaders, you know, way more honestly than Pakistanis or Indians,
You
whether it
can't
is,
have a Family Guy in Pakistan or India, right?
yeah, there's no chance. Or you can't even have a film like JFK. You cannot have a film like Vietnam War pe itni jo bani hai. You cannot have an honest film about the Indo-Pak War. Like, for example, I have spoken to people who fought the Kargil War, and they tell me about this one guy who they were all so impressed by. They could see he was like, they said, "We get him, we'll take on that, the guys who had occupied Tiger." And they finally got him. He was on our side, and when the body was sent back, they said that, our commander, in his fist, he gave a parcha saying this guy fought like a lion. I forget his name. Now you
He was the
cannot make
great
an honest.
Colonel Sher Khan.
So, and those guys will tell you this in person, but you cannot make an honest film about heroes on both sides. You cannot. I cannot make an honest film today about the Babri demolition, and I cannot make an honest film uh, about the Golden Temple, the assault on the Golden Temple, and the Congress is in power. Culturally, and similarly for you cannot make an honest film about, let's say, you know ZR, if he's in power. So, but having said that, even America, having been able to dissect its heroes way more honestly, it hasn't prevented polarization there either. So I don't know if that actually is an effective uh, way to provide insulation to polarization, because it hasn't worked. But I think it should be done. It makes institutions more robust.
The absolute freedom of speech, Trump has turned that on its head, and then the era of polarization and social media has made democracy question its own ideals. Maybe that's a separate discussion. When I was in the US, I met a civil rights leader who was part of this Million March, and she was a woman, and she spoke about the same thing. And she also spoke about how Martin Luther King was savvy enough to know when there'll be cameras, when to appear, when to not put your life at risk. But as we said, human beings are flawed. Would you also say that something similar is also happening to Nehru? Because I've also seen a lot of Indian comments, and this is just me judging by Indian comments on my YouTube videos. So my pool by which I'm judging this is very, very small. There's also it's a lot more critical of Nehru than maybe some people in Pakistan are. We do appreciate a lot of the things Nehru did because we feel like we couldn't do those things like land reforms, things like just shaping the country in his image, which Qaeda couldn't do, and we're still fighting over what kind of Pakistan Qaeda wanted. Is that revisionism around Nehru as well in India?
Yeah, I think it is, but again, I don't think it's new. It was always there, but now those people have the microphone. I think uh, there have been certain pretty honest takes on Nehru. I think even people like Guha have kind of written about him fairly honestly in Ramchandra Guha's India After Gandhi. Um, there have been other books. I mean, I have read books on Savarkar, which paint Nehru in a less than ideal light. So I think there has been scrutiny of Nehru way more than of Bapu. I don't think it's a new thing. I think, like I said, it is it has become something of a fashion because it gives you voice. It's a call for a certain ideology who are extremely aggressive. I mean, you can be of a certain ideology, but not be the nutters in that space. So that and I don't think it is unfair or untrue that like everything has been named after Nehru. I think it's a bit much, from stadiums to universities to this to that. Like everything is Nehru. I generally don't think that's a great idea. Uh, Whether back then it was okay or not, I mean, I don't know, but I think maybe it's a pushback to that. But it's fundamentally, I think it is an ideological clash that has come to head today because the RSS, which was fundamentally opposed to Nehru's idea of India, his vision of India, and Guruji's vision of India, Guru Golwalkar's or Hedgewar's, was very different. It was not at all similar. And it is after a very long time that ideology has a voice that is as loud as Nehru's. Because otherwise, Nehru's voice was the loudest in the sense of not his, you know what I'm saying, like, whatever, he had kind of set off. So that's why you hear it, it's new. But I don't think it didn't exist earlier. It's just that the balance is a little more now. Uh, I do think that only a man like Nehru could have got India from the 40s to the 60s. I don't think any other leader, anyone could have negotiated India through that tumultuous period and kept it together. Because the more you read about it, and unfortunately, most praise as well as hate comes from ignorance. I don't think today's generation realizes how India was on the brink of shattering. It was not. It was not the independence. मिल गया, अब हम सब साथ मिलके चल रहे हैं. Every day, someone wanted to go off on their own, and only Nehru could have kept it together. Uh, and I do think Nehru was elitist. I think he came from that slightly 18 mindset. I think Pakistani elite have that problem more than Indian elite because the rich poor, because they didn't have the kind of reformist movements like land reforms, etc. An Ambedkar or a Periyar was not there. So the only time I've come to Pakistan and one or two Pakistani friends I did have, I realized that there are two worlds. The rich and poor are so living in completely different worlds. India is a little more, we're all pushing against each other. Although now it's becoming a little more separate, which I think is dangerous. I think I've seen lots of talks where if they become two cocoons, the country kind of shatters. But in Pakistan, so I think uh, Nehru was a bit elitist, but that is a small price to pay for being able to do what he had and keeping India, for most part, secular ideals were important, and I think are still important for a very large chunk of Indians.
The anti-colonial part of the Indian movement really helped how India was shaped, whereas I think the leaders on the Pakistan side tended to be more colonial in their ways of governance, more colonial in their reverence towards certain ideals which they thought uh, Pakistan would be formed on. So we did have those clashes as well in our history. We're not told those stories as loudly. I mean, Bacha Khan is somebody that most of Pakistan might not be aware, but his work is quite seminal. If we do talk about changing India, these ideas seem pretty vague, especially to people sitting in Pakistan. They might just latch on to certain anecdotes or certain points and pretend that things have changed. So if we are to personalize the story, coming from a family where your dadi was Congress till she dies, and your father was Congress, then went to BJP, then went to Aam Aadmi Party, can we personalize this idea of changing India to your family, and can you explain to us how it's changing?
Wow, you've really done your research, man.
I spoke to your
Huh?
family. ये है मेरा नाम है फारूक शेख और ये है आपकी जिंदगी.
So you probably heard this from my podcast. Is that right? Yeah, my now that for example, I have voted in the I think early 2000s. I voted Mayawati a couple of times because I thought the entire caste dynamic was the biggest problem in India, and many people would have all sorts of things to say about Mayawati. She's corrupt. I was like, as if the Congress leaders aren't. It's not like you have a problem with her corruption because of perceived corruption. Ya to convicted because of where she comes from. You are okay with that kind of corruption if that person is in South Delhi and you went to school with his son and you engage with them at parties. That's okay. But Mayawati she cannot be. So I have voted Mayawati. I have voted Atalji. Then I have not voted also. A few times I was like, this is a pointless exercise. Then I have, but yeah, I have never voted Modi. I mean, I had no illusions about what that would be about. But in my own family, my dadi, I could never understand when she said, "Hum to Congresi hain." What does that mean? But at the same time, one part of my family that actually came from Pakistan, uh, they say we will vote for the Sangh. That doesn't mean they'll vote for BJP. And it is from them that I realized that the Sangh and the BJP aren't all the time one. Let's say the Sangh comes and tells us to vote communist, we'll vote communist, but we will vote what the Sangh says. Because this was a generation, this is my grandmother's relatives who had come from Lahore. They said when we came here, the people who actually took care of us here was the Sangh. So we owe them our life and our existence. So we will do what they say. So I've had people in my family who said, हम तो संघ ही हैं, जो संघ बोलेगा हम वो करेंगे. I have people in my family who say हम तो कांग्रेस ही हैं. I was like, dude, use don't just commit yourself. It's not a, I mean, even religions you can change. Yeah? It's today to even genders you can change. You can be fluid on that also. But you cannot just commit to, I will vote them all their lives. Who knows what they turn out to be? So I have always, you know, zigged and zagged, and then, just when I started working with Arvind as an activist, then that was purely a personal decision because he was a friend. I trust him, and I saw him take something from 12 people to 12 million. I think that's a case study of in one generation being able to create something of that size. But what I have found, and my father moving from Congress to Modi to AAP, I guess that the last was my influence. but uh, but I do think that different people like for example, I don't condemn everybody, and that is again a problem in the polarized times that anyone who votes BJP or bigot, Sangi, I don't think that's productive, and it's not even true.
Of deplorables idea.
Sorry?
How Hillary was like, it's a basket of deplorables who vote for Trump.
Yeah, exactly. It's
What
not
a
even true.
blowback that idea.
Many people who I know who are reasonable, rational, decent people vote for Modi. They have their reasons. And the thing is that because we are in the news, we think everybody consumes news like us.
Hmm.
They don't. I have friends who are extremely well read, they are informed, they don't know Sambit Patra. When I say, but how can a man like Sambit Patra, they say, who's Sambit Patra? And these people are not some ignoramuses, they are like heading big, big organizations. They are like, heading departments and entire verticals and multinationals and banks. They don't consume news like we do. So for them, they don't know Sadhvi Pragya. They don't know Sambit Patra. They don't care. So their understanding of BJP is very different from my understanding of BJP. That Tejinder Bagga has been given the kind of position he has. So every decision of the BJP, I'm scrutinizing. Okay, so this is what is rewarded. Whereas there is an entire chunk of people who don't know that in Jantar Mantar there was a, protest where anti-Muslim slogans. They don't know. I think it's sad there's that apathy, but not everybody who votes a certain way represents the entire fringe of that ideology. And I think that's true for any party. That's true for the BJP. It's true. I don't think everyone who votes communists wants a revolution. I don't think they even want equality or equity. So it's complicated, and especially in a country like India, it's complicated. Like one thing that I have always said, and I've said this, it's specifically true. I think I may have tweeted this also. True for India and Pakistan specifically, is that on certain aspects the liberals are very liberal. On certain aspects they're not. Like for example, both in India and Pakistan, the elite who for whom religion is poo poo, they will be very liberal and progressive on religion and the mullahs or the sadhus. But uh, on economic inequality or the feudal mindset, on that they're not at all liberal. Like one village doesn't have water to drink, but your palace has the swimming pool. So I can put, there is no liberalism there. There it is feudal. And it is very unique to Indians and Pakistanis, where the liberalism is very selective.
Unique though. I mean, isn't the Hollywood elite the same, that they're going to charter a plane for a conference, but then preach about the environment? I mean, the Pakistani elite tends to be particularly intellectually bogus because they're also pro-establishment, they're pro-military, they're anti-democracy. So the elite in Pakistan, I don't think is even liberal, or they even pretend to be liberal.
Okay. Well, interesting point that you make. I think this whole, and there was a lot of criticism about this, private jets, the amount of private jets that went for COP22, etc. But I do think that is not uniform, and that is a new age kind of paradox we got to figure out. Because when, like, for example, a friend of mine who gets very offended when people give him this whole environmental thing of eating meat, and especially, like, especially beef, because people who have a religious stake give it an environmental twist. So Rocky, he tweets about it all the time. But then I saw another paper which he had shared with me, that how much water it takes to grow almonds and almond milk. So, but your almond milk is taking more water than my cow is taking milk. So, you can get into what is actually doing more damage, but I get the larger point you're making. I think these private jets are a newer thing, but you're absolutely right on being these environmental warriors and flying private, which I don't have a clear position on it yet, but it, on the face of it, sounds a bit hypocritical. But I think there's something unique on the inconsistencies of this subcontinent's liberals. They're an extremely convenient liberals. It's very what works for me. It's less ideological. It's more practical.
He has unfettered wealth. I mean, Elon Musk can be liberal on freedom of speech, but he's not a liberal if you're worth $8 billion or however much worth he is. So if you're in that bracket, I think it's impossible for you to be liberal in the truest sense.
Sure,
The
sure.
embodiment of income inequality and everything wrong with it. And even when it comes to the establishment, right? It's not like the US elite will ever go against the US military, despite the US military being the single biggest polluter in the world.
Right, true. I mean, in America, the army is like,
Yeah.
you cannot say anything at the. But again, by their standards, they can still make a film like.
I mean, there was widespread protest against the Vietnam War.
Exactly. I think in India and Pakistan, you cannot make a film critical of the army. You can't do that, no matter what. So America, I think the standards are very different when we compare ourselves to America. It's society. It's I mean, it's a different kind of standard as opposed to here. So even institutionally,
if we are juxtaposing the two, there's an idea in the US which you mentioned that not necessarily everybody who votes for Trump is a racist. And the black community might say, you might not be a racist, but you're willing to forego racism for economic needs or for anything else. Would you say the same logic applies in India and even in Pakistan for people who vote for parties which are akin to Trump? Trump would be Imran Khan.
no, I don't think people. I mean, of course, there are some who are in that zone who think bigotry is an acceptable price to pay for personal comfort. Uh, and I think there were a lot of people like that in Nazi Germany as well. But I think, at least in India, and probably the same is true for Pakistan, a lot of people are genuinely not aware of the level of divisiveness. They genuinely do not consume news in the sense, not even a fraction of what we do. They don't see it as bigotry. Genuinely, I think there are a lot of such people. Um, and I think that's unfortunate, and that's a failure of education. That's a failure of our entire political process of kind of keeping people engaged politically. Um, I mean, since I've traveled a lot making travel shows, I realized that context is very important. Like, when I used to go to the Northeast, and I made a few trips there to, Arunachal, Mizoram, Nagaland, Manipur. We went to Sikkim also. The youth there are party agnostic. They actually do not give a shit. And it's not because someone is bigoted or not bigoted or religion. Their demands are very today. You see, not everybody is looking 10 years mein kya hoga, 20 years mein kya hoga. You see, today. So it's not, the question is not in their head that am I sacrificing, you know, civilized society for personal comfort and exchanging it for bigotry in the future? That question is not there in their head. So I think it's very complicated, and that is why you have so many people who swing, right? I mean, you just see the vote share that can move like 5% move from here to there. It's not like those 5%, like even in America to an extent, the same people who trended Obama, just 3% of them got Trump, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's, and also there are a lot of people who don't vote, like Brexit. If Brexit would have happened today, I don't think, and I remember all the data that came out back then, that the people above 65, the vote percentage of that was, theirs was above 70% of them voted. And people below 25, just, not even 30% of them voted. Some who are just not involved in the political process. So I mean, it's complicated, which is why I think as often as possible, I try to engage with most people. But once they cross a certain line of having said something that, अच्छा हुआ बुलडोजर चल गए, अच्छा हुआ इसका ये हुआ, अच्छा हुआ इसका सर उड़ा दिया, then I don't engage with them because that means they know what's happening and endorse it.
You're spot on. Something that never gets mentioned about electoral politics in Pakistan is as well is the person in the village who's voting. He's voting because he feels this person would be able to bring water to my house. He really doesn't care about their policies or even their party ticket. The same person will win with a PPP ticket in 2008, with a PMLN ticket in 2013, and a PTI ticket in 2018 because the village feels like this is the person that I can go to if tomorrow my road's broken, if my child is sick. So that personal stakes of electoral politics don't get discussed enough. दैट बीइंग सेड, वो जो एक मीम भी बहुत इंडिया में चली थी कि क्रोनोलॉजी समझें इन पाकिस्तान आई कैन मे बी ड्रॉ लाइक अ क्लियर क्रोनोलॉजी from Ziaul Haq, from the ideas that he instilled, from the ideas that he promoted. He may not have had widespread acceptance, but once you've send those ideas into the world, it might take a decade, it might take 2 decades, but they seep in, and the nature of what a country is or a populace is fundamentally changes. So, do you feel like कि ये वही chronology India mimic करने की कोशिश कर रहा है, or do you feel like India's secular values are much stronger than Pakistan's have ever been? Pakistan has made no qualms about being a religious state, or at least at least being an Islamic republic. Do you feel like India will never become a Hindu Pakistan because of how strong historically the secular values of India have been.
I've stopped using words like never. Maybe 10, 15 years I used to use such words. Maybe not 10, but 15, 20 years. I have, with experience, you learn to stop using absolute words because you've seen too much that you never thought would happen. But I think it is highly unlikely and definitely less likely than Pakistan. A, because you said Pakistan was founded on a religious identity. Um, Secondly, I think the multiculturalism in India is immense. Like, for example, there is more in common between someone from Punjab, India, and
Mhm.
someone from Punjab, Pakistan. Then there is the Punjab, India, then with the person in Arunachal Pradesh. The South is a great buffer from the Brahmanical Hindutva, Hindustan kind of thing from the rest, which is why you see the BJP's presence there is other than Karnataka is not likely. I mean, they're trying very hard. Similarly with the Northeast, I think with India, one cliche that is actually very true, and which is why only a man like Nehru could have kept together, is the unity in diversity. The diversity in India is amazing, and I can tell you, other than my co-founder and two of my friends who are also the hosts of one of the travel shows that I used to make. Um, I don't know many people who have traveled India the amount we did. Over 9 years, we covered the whole country by road, yeah. And covering it by road is like you go through districts, you spend nights, you have lunch. It is insanely diverse, man. The only state we did not drive through was Tripura because the cost benefit analysis of shooting episodes there and the road conditions did not kind of allow us to go through. But otherwise, we went like we start from Kolkata, went all across Bengal, Assam, Arunachal, Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipur. We Sikkim. We came back. It's a 28-day trip. We started from Kashmir and we went down to Kanyakumari. You know, along the west coast, Gujarat, Kutch. Then we did the same thing from here. Then we did zigzagging through. So the unity, and I think that is why it's going to be very difficult, or it's going to be even the whole RSS project from 1925. We're in 2024. It's taken 100 years for them to get that what Guruji had envisaged, that power, and they're still not there. It may take 200 years, and now world changes too fast with the internet. All bets are off. So I think that likelihood of that is very remote in India. That uniformity of a religious identity being a primary identity. I don't think. Uh, I, I think it's unlikely it'll happen in my lifetime. And because of the pace of the world, I think India will get integrated into the rest of the world too fast for that to be a project that can be fulfilled.
Maybe linked to
But
that is the sorry, continue.
no, but having said that, I do think that a critical mass of that has already been reached for that to become a significant voice. Just like a critical mass has been reached in America, uh, or even some of the new parties that have been floated in Germany that have won enough votes who think Hitler was a good idea. What I'm saying is it's not a, and I think social media has. I'm sure these people were scattered. Like for example, in the early 2000s, I could not imagine sitting in a civilized, you know, gathering and someone saying that you know it's not all bad. I think Muslims need to be taught a lesson. I mean, if you said that, you would never be invited to any dinner party again. There was no chance, even if you thought that. But I'm sure every party of 15 people had two such people. We just didn't know who they were. Social media, those two people from every block have discovered each other. Now they have a party of 80, 100, and they, whether they're on WhatsApp. Today they can sit and say that. And because five others are scared, they will not challenge them. There'll be two, three like me who will say, how can you say such a thing? Are you not ashamed? And then people like us getting stopped and invited to parties, but that's fine. But you see, they are still not in the majority, but they have reached a critical mass.
When these things get institutionalized, things get become much worse. I mean, party that pretends to be the most progressive out of the mainstream parties in Pakistan is the Pakistan People's Party. But to appease far right, they institutionalize certain laws, and 50 years later, they're blowing up in our faces a lot more. And once you put it into the constitution, it might take 5 years, it might take 10 years, but at some point, it crystallizes into a reality. And then the calls of if you don't like it, get out of our country. There was somebody yesterday who was saying anything that we're doing, it's as per the constitution. So the CAA, yeah, Jesse Deepak was on Beer Biceps and he says liberals don't understand what CAA actually is. It's not anti-Muslim. So what's your take on the CAA?
Yeah, the thing is that the fact is that it's not gone anywhere after the election is you see the circularity of logic on that is that it does not impact Indian citizens. Why are you scared? But a combination of CAA and NRC we will decide who's an Indian citizen. But it does not impact Indian citizens, but we will decide who's an Indian citizen. So then basically the fate of every Muslim is in your hands. Na? Don't worry, you're an Indian citizen, it will not impact you. But we will tell you who's an Indian citizen. So I think it's deeply problematic. I think the purpose of such things is elections. It's on stay. It's in limbo. And what it has led to is in Assam, a few these camps that are there, which are Scroll has done some fantastic reporting from, which are deeply problematic. So yeah, I mean, I think it is not required. I think there are many ways the problems or the perceived problems that they want to solve can be solved for. I have no doubt these are dog whistles. And I mean, I personally think that there is enough evidence around us to see where this leads, where this road goes. So yeah, I do not agree with the CANRC at all.
In terms of the economic advancements and the technological advancements India has made over the past decade, the podcast that you talked about with Zach Yunus, we discussed, there's this notion around the world that once societies evolve economically and reach a certain point, even if we had to quote Maslow's hierarchy of needs on a personal level, then these ideas of religious bigotry become less important. I'm less likely to go burn somebody on the street if I'm well fed, if I have a family, if I have a good job. Anybody who's working for Unilever is less likely to go and burn shit down on the street because they have too much to lose. So, what's your take on this idea that the fears exist, but if India advances economically and is able to provide economically to a critical mass of people, then these voices or this violence will always remain on the fringe as opposed to becoming a mass movement?
I don't have a very thought through and dogmatic position on this, but I have a few thoughts. Uh, I think generally that logic may be kind of true because for that last mile violence, even people who sit in drawing rooms and say, "ठीक है, अगर हो गया तो क्या हो गया?" They're not the ones who will go out and burn someone. So purely in that kind of logic, it makes sense. From the logic of what we see around the world in Europe, I mean, it's the countries that are really poor, like some of the videos that I see, which are very disturbing from Africa, of people being burnt in riots, or I see some videos from Brazil of the kind of violence that you see. You see such videos in India when that lynchings and people are being beaten up or killed for being of a particular religion. Uh, so I think generally, if you were to see the macro data, that may be true. But I think it is a bit simplistic. I think there may be a little more than that because even if you will not go and do that kind of stuff, what you can end up doing is in order to protect that economic, the absence of violence is not peace, basically. The absence of violence can be fear as well. Like, if a critical mass of people are okay with it, you don't need people to go out and beat people up. The state is enough. The bulldozers of state, or people say Yogi Ji's bulldozers will teach XYZ a lesson or will do this. So I don't think that is as comfort providing as one would think. Bhai, let's do well economically, everything will fall into place. I don't think it's that simple, especially in societies like India and Pakistan, which are extremely layered and they're way more intertwined and complicated than Western societies. The entire caste angle, religions, ethnicities, the history, the zamidar. Like, but yes, I think it prevents a complete collapse. I think one of the biggest things where India and Pakistan kind of diverged, like in Diwar, with Amitabh and Shashi Kapoor going on different paths. The whole religion thing is a very important thing, but I don't think it is the clincher. I think clincher was in India the land reforms and people like Ambedkar and Periyar saying that society cannot live in these cocoons, that feudal thing that they collapsed. Even Vinoda Bhave for all his endorsement of the emergency and stuff. We had several reformists in that sense. And that is purely because India was not just Hindu and Muslim. It was caste, it was ethnicity, it was the South and the Tamil identity saying that we are not Hindi. And Pakistan could have had that, but East Pakistan and West Pakistan was not together. If it was together, maybe things would have been different. There would have been that whole jostling for cultural identity. And I think those reformers ensured India had a lot more chaos, but could power ahead with a informed, critical mass of what we call middle class, which statistically would not be middle class, but in the mindset, yes, for sure. Uh, and I think that was the big clincher, which kind of saved India. And I still think, and I remember when we were young, people would give us the example of Pakistan में तो coke मिलता है, हब्बा बब्बा मिलती है, यहाँ नहीं मिलता. In class 2, 3, because I remember, apparently, I don't know if it is true, that you could get coke in Pakistan, you could get habba babba also. Here you had this gum which was as hard as rock, and whoever got habba babba was like clearly a millionaire. So I think the reason that manufacturing and self-sufficiency in Pakistan could not emerge is because the alliance there was America, and ours was technically non-aligned, but Russia. And while a lot of people, abuse Nehru for that, I think that was the smartest thing he did. Because I think any country in its infancy, when it's just learning to crawl and the toddlers just, the moment you ally with America, they will finish you, man. I think had Pakistan not been so closely aligned with America, things could have been a lot different. And I think that is something one's learned in history, that an infant state should stay as far away from America as possible. And today we can abuse Nehru all we want. But had we gone down the way of being America's sidekicks, India would be a different place.
The founders would argue that Pakistan would not have existed. That's maybe a different debate.
That's
All
true,
the
yeah.
military support that they got from the US, there was a price to pay. So there was a quid pro quo there. If we do this as a sequitur into news laundry, maybe this would be a good segue into that. Can democracy flourish in an ill-informed populace?
Well, I don't think so. I think, and I keep repeating this, I'm sure people who have heard me more than one occasion are sick of me saying the same thing and again, that the reason the news media is considered the fourth pillar of democracy, and that is because the other three pillars, the robustness and strength and quality of them is determined by a voting population. They decide what these pillars should look like through their vote. And voting is not the only way to exercise your democratic right. Right to Information Act, which is being murdered every day. There are various ways of engaging with governance and politics, and voting is one. But all these jostlings for activism, for mind space, for space in the public square, uh, comes from a citizenry that consumes information, and information consumption about the life around you comes from news, and especially governance. And when that pillar gets corrupted, when that pipeline gets corroded, societies will collapse. So I think, and there is history. I mean, you see Rwanda, you see Germany, you see Uganda, you see Spain during Franco's time, you see China. I mean, history is replete. Milosevic, Thana, what was in his time also? Just the way they completely finished news, and we saw what happened. So I think that is why an informed citizenry is very important to keep democracy alive and well. Otherwise, it can go downhill very fast. I have a question for you, but once you're done, can I?
Think about the social media as chaos theory. I think maybe for a very brief period of time, there was this notion of citizen journalism that everybody could have a voice, and people tried controlling that, especially in Pakistan, where our establishment has always been very fearful of the masses. So they tried controlling that before they realized, oh, we could just confuse them so much that they won't know what the truth is. Where Donald Trump did the same thing, where if you destroy the institutional credibility of papers like New York Times or CNN, one might question their bias. But if the New York Times says that there was a fire in a building yesterday, you couldn't question that. But maybe now you can if you're a Trump supporter, which is
Yeah.
exactly what's happening in Pakistan as well. For what you might say about their political bias, Jung and Dawn were the two oldest, most credible news agencies. Now it's come to a point where Dawn might report an accurate fact, uh, and people will think it's fake reality or it's alternate reality that they've created. So in a world where the news might show you a video clip and you might question that, it might only going to get worse with AI coming on board. So for instance, yesterday there was a rescue operation by the army. There
Yeah.
was a chair that was stuck. There's widespread conspiracy theories on news on social media that the army faked it, that the army just to project themselves halted the rescue operations, that they did not actually rescue. So you've confused the masses with so much conspiracy that you've started questioning reality as you see it. In a world like that, how does news function, or how does the news consumer stay sane?
Well, it's a very difficult prospect. It's a very difficult proposition. And I think this is where something that has been started earlier when I was a child in school, which was EVS, environmental studies. That environment is a thing to be protected. It's important, and it had to be taught. Similarly, socially useful productive work (SUPW), which became a normal thing later. Our generation is the one who like it was introduced to us as a thing that you have to do this as part of school curriculum. You go, whether you go cleaning litters around the city or you go to a Cheshire home, or you work with underprivileged kids, just to give you an idea that the world is not your little boarding school. um, I think media literacy will have to start from that what is news, why is it important, because and how do you consume it responsibly, how do you account for biases. I mean, there is something bias and there's something that's fake news, like you got to kind of separate the two. So it's becoming increasingly difficult, and I think this is where brands will be more important than they ever were. However, having said that, I will say that all the social media noise and the fake news becoming a thing, I still am more optimistic on the potential outcomes of the digital world than the downsides. I agree with you that when you read books like The Digital Age, I keep forgetting the three authors who kind of wrote that, and I remember that was written 12 years ago. There's a book called The Digital Age. It's got three authors. I think one of them is the founder of Google, and they had, I think it was written in 2010 or 11, and it had predicted when the ad spring happened, the social media will allow individual journalists, stories that could not come out early will come out, and it had a very uh, a happy and sanitized view of how the digital age will impact news media, and many things it had predicted, and these are really smart people. It's the opposite has happened. So having said that, I still think that the potential upsides are way, way more profound and significant. And I think we will get to see those in our lifetime. I think the uniform, I think there's a lot more noise, but that doesn't mean that there is not a lot more reason as well. The example I'll give you is that in 1984, what happened on the streets of Delhi, most of the country was not aware of it. I only got to know it when I grew up, because what we saw on television was just the state television of Mrs. Gandhi's lying in ceremony. We didn't know what was happening on the streets of Delhi, the most horrible crimes being committed against a minority. But we know what happened in 2002 in Ahmedabad, in Gujarat, because there were cameras there. Today, this. A lot has been happening which we're not aware of. Now, that is desensitizing a generation, or it's making them oversensitive. I don't know, how it impacts the brain. But I think net, future generations will understand a lot more on what is happening in the world and in different pockets. And the human collective consciousness, I think, corrects for the better. And I think we will see that in the digital age. People will know more. They will know more ugliness. They will know more horrific incidents. They will know more of polarization. And therefore, they will know better how to correct it. That's what I think.
Maybe if we do look at these events in retrospect after 1984, I don't think there's been a repetition of that scale against that community. Whereas post 2002, where the populace was more informed, we've seen an escalation of such events. Similarly, in Pakistan, but historically, maybe sometimes churches burn down, maybe. But the recent rise in crime and it being televised has almost resulted in it inspiring more people to do the same. Their
Sure.
voices just become louder. So just the fact that information is more readily available and it will appeal to the collective consciousness of humanity, I think that hypothesis is being challenged a lot by recent events.
It is, no doubt. I think it's being challenged a lot, but I still think there is a lot there that is yet to be played out. I think many hands are not. We are in the early stages of this game of cards. I think the large chunk of people are fence sitters, and they will not push till they have to take a position. And with time, I think they will have to take a position. It is going to be very difficult to not take a position on many of these things, because as you're exposed to it. So, and in that sense, I think civilization is called civilization because it demonstrates traits of being civilized.
Proponent of free speech, normally I would be arguing the other side, but since we're having this discussion, if we are to make this pipeline remain free, if we're discussing the Rwandan genocide, it was propagated by the radio. People who heard that engaged in it. If we talk about what happened to the Rohingya Muslims, it was Facebook. It was a lot of these Facebook posts, and now we see a lot of these WhatsApp forwards. So if we are proponents of keeping this pipeline free and giving everybody access to put up whatever they want in this pipeline, at the end of the day, we know people are drinking this water. So if somebody is poisoning, and we are advocating for the pipeline to remain free as it is, uh, then we're also advocating for the rights for people to poison that pipeline, and it ends up in the same homes of the same people that we want the information to go.
Sure, I agree with you. Also, the whole, I have, I think, at least once or twice called myself a free speech absolutist, but that was, pre-digital age being where we are now. I think, as you see, like for example, the whole thing that before you could just put out information, it would go across the world. Like, said that if I can't speak fire in the classic example,
Yeah.
shouting fire in the cinema is not free speech. Now, our laws and our understanding of certain concepts was for the offline analog world. But when you extend that same logic digitally, it's not apples for apples. It complicates things significantly. So, my understanding of free speech pre and post digital age is very different. And even I've spoken to many free speech advocates here in India. Even they said we use the word absolutist very loosely. It's nowhere is it absolute. Let's be clear. The word absolutist is actually inaccurate. Uh, for example, even in a country like Germany, I cannot do the Heil Hitler salute and stuff. It's illegal. In Rwanda, you cannot ask anyone their caste. You cannot say, are you Tutsi also? It is against the law. I had gone there for a conference, and I went to the museum, the genocide museum, and it was like ghastly. I mean, so I think in a lot of countries, uh, it takes an extreme injustice or an extremely horrific mass scale act of violence for people to recalibrate where they are on many issues, including what is freedom of speech. Uh, so, in that sense, my position has become a little more nuanced. Uh, but at the same time, I do think there is the bar to make it criminal should be very high. I can condemn it, I may say, but I will still err on the side of letting much of what you and I call hate speech be called out socially, but not be criminalized. I think there is a huge danger there. The only thing that I think one needs to do more of is have people speak up against it. What happens is, in countries where institutions are not that robust, a law is used to curtail the freedom of speech of someone who's not saying anything wrong. But someone's spreading hate. It's not equal. And because the law is not applied equally, you cannot have a very utopian or by this should be the law. Sure, it should if it is applied the way it is intended. So otherwise, in an imperfect world, one has to account for imperfections. So I am not for criminality of hate, but I think when enough people of a certain disposition who are close to whichever is the ruling government are tried under that, suddenly the likelihood of that being used against it goes down. But then everybody starts using it. Because not all states are ruled by one party. Na? They say, fine, you arrest 5 hours for that, we'll arrest 5 years for the same thing over there. That's okay, let's not use it.
These
So,
principles are just as valid as how good the gatekeeper is. Twitter has become a much worse place than since Elon Musk has
so
taken over. So Elon Musk's principles, Elon Musk's ideas about the world are suddenly being projected onto this digital media app, which we almost looked at as an embodiment of freedom of speech.
right.
There's a lot more you could say on Twitter now, and even community notes are biased. So then one can maybe make the argument that a pre-community note, pre-Elon Musk world, where you were free to say anything on Twitter, was a lot better than this controlled version. You hinted about it a few minutes ago, but I'd love for you to expand because I get accused of this often as well. I think all of us are in search of that Walter Cronkite idea of news, which simply does not exist. And it personal pet peeve of mine as well that you should be objective and neutral, whereas it doesn't exist. As long as somebody comes out and says, "This is my vantage point. This is how I see it. And this is what it is," I think that's as fair as something that you can ever get, as opposed to somebody pretending that they're neutral and objective and feeding you bullshit. So, in terms of ideas of neutrality, objectivity, and fairness in news, please, what's your thesis?
So, I mean, we have a piece on Newslaundry, which I encourage everybody who joins us to read, that what is our position on Newslaundry. And when I say our position, I see a lot of, typically legacy newspapers have the side edit, which doesn't carry a name. Some of them, like Times of India, used to have something called Our Take. Uh, Hindustan Times also had a similar thing, or all the papers have these nameless. Now, I think that was a bad idea. It may have been a good idea for its time, but like all ideas, it must evolve because it assumed that everybody in that organization would have that view, or at least all the leaders, and that need not be true. In fact, our podcast Hafta was originally an exercise in transparency because our position was that we are not objective. Just the fact, and this is when I'm invited to universities and go and lecture, I say suppose you go to a village that has been hit by a flood, 5 reporters go, one reporter does a story on one woman who, because all the humans are taken care of, all the cattle and the animals and the dogs are drowning, so she's created a little pen in a hillock to take care of animals. That's a lovely feel good human interest story that Sara attention sabka humans pe hai, this woman has created a little place to protect animals. One story is about, let's say, the army coming and rescuing people. It's a feel good story, dekho army aate. One is a story of all the relief work that is coming, someone is selling it in the black market, so that's the story of corruption. वन स्टोरी इज भाई ये क्यों हुआ देखो क्लाइमेट डिजास्टर यहाँ पर एक फैक्ट्री चल रही थी दे हैव eroded the mountain that is a you know environmental plus big industry killing the moment you pick one of these stories to do, where's your objectivity? You cannot do all. Objectivity is God's voice. Objectivity is math is as close to objectivity as we can get. Nothing is objective, not even science is objective, and I say that, and many scientists challenge me, but that's more philosophical take, which has I have arrived at that conclusion after reading a few books on this. uh, so
History proves that, right? Science has historically. maybe science itself, as it's undiscovered, is not racist, but the scientists who were the positions of authority historically have been racist, and that has seeped into what
Not
we
just
call.
that, even science itself, an experiment, like the light, is it a wave or is it a, the experiment will decide, what which particle or a wave. Um, your position will determine how you perceive something else. So
The observer
so
effect.
yeah, so math itself, at least conceptually, 2 plus 2 is 4 here on Saturn or in a black hole. But we don't know if the laws of physics, the way we understand them, apply in a supernova or one of those wormholes, etc., if they exist. So I mean, of course, you've gone into a different tangent, but the thing is that objectivity, but we must try and be fair and accurate. Accuracy is the first step to trying to be anything in the news space. And this is where leadership comes in. Try to have a newsroom that has diversity of thought and opinion and let people articulate it. Because only that way can we critically examine our own views, our own beliefs. Have smart people do that. I mean, I'm not saying have the Aman Sharmas give them prime time. I mean, you cannot have. See, one is a tamasha. You get an idiot to do a tamasha. Hey, dekho, hey, oh, aise. I'm not talking about that. But the leadership team of any news organization that is, that wants to kind of challenge your mind. So that diversity helps. Diversity fundamentally is a fantastic, selfish thing to do just to uh, inform yourself better, to make yourself better and smarter. So, and that will say, okay, this is a story that I thought this is the story, but that person has given me a view that, okay, that's interesting as well. Um, for example, the whole Bollywood being used by politics. We have not raised this question to the extent today because it's gone to a level where we see it too plainly. But it's happened in the past as well in different ways. So it allows us to see how things moved. It allows us to identify things. So I think mm, you can't be objective. You can be fair and accurate. Try to be fair and can be accurate completely. And as news professionals, and this is why leadership matters, if algorithms and systems could make anything work, Trump would not be able to destroy America that he has potentially being able to do. Because in America, systems are very robust, institutions are very robust. The courts, the media, the federal structure. But even one insane man is all it takes to, toss it into a spin. So context is the most important thing in news. Did person from community A kill person from community B? Maybe it's true. In an environment X, that story may be a benign, banal story of crime. In an environment Y, that story can have very different repercussions. Context matters. Therefore, I think context setting is the job of the leadership team. That's why you need people of experience in news to set the context. These are times we live in. Like Gulzar Saab had said in the media rumble when he had come, that poetry and cinema is not just the telling of a story, it is the telling of these were the times we lived in. When people 100 years from now will read my work or see my films, they will say, okay, this is what the world was like. In fact, Piketty in his book has taken Jane Austen's novels to figure out what was the purchasing power of a pound or then as opposed to now. He says that such and such woman was to be engaged to such and such landlord who had an annual inheritance of XYZ, and he was considered very rich. So by today's standard, if that was very rich, how is it? People use literature for all sorts of, economists use that to figure what was economic conditions, social conditions, what was love, what was gender dynamic, what was how, just the kind of lyrics that we hum. uh, I'm losing it right now, but it was a beautiful song by Devanan that I love humming. But when you examine its lyrics, it basically something to the tune of that, don't look at me like that or I will do a galti, and then basically it's, dude, whether you say yes or no, I'm going to come out. It's a very beautiful song with him and Sadhana. But when you hear it today, a woke child will say, how can those lyrics be acceptable? But it tells you about that, what was love back then, what was society back then. So context setting is a question of experience. So I think editors and leaders need to set the context for reporters, because these are the times we're living in. These are the values that are being challenged. These are the values that have been established. These are the values of our founding fathers, which you may agree or disagree with. In that context, what do you think is an important story to do? If you only have 3 stories to do, if you have 20 reporters, if you don't have beats, and then the reporters go out and do the stories with a commitment to facts, context setting is the leadership's job. I think that's my take on objectivity, which and also I don't think nameless edits should be there. If I have something to say, it should say Abhinandan is saying that. News Laundry, nahi. There are many News Laundry who disagree with me, and people who listen to Hafta can vouch for that.
Hollywood has always been to हाँ कर या ना कर तू है मेरी कर. There was a
Mm.
similar discussion around Baby It's Cold Outside that had the same notion,
Yeah.
considered flirting back then. What would you say about lazy journalism, that people tend to feign neutrality, and this is the maybe the Arnabization of news, where if you call a party member from each of the popular parties, somehow it's become objective, somehow it's become neutral because you're getting everybody's take. But it's lazy, it's disingenuous. So, what's your general take on this both siding of every issues, where people pretend to be neutral and objective just by inviting two people and having them have a go at each other?
I mean, it's a circus. Prime time is a circus, and I've seen, and that's true across the world. I've seen that in the U.S. I've seen that in. I mean, I don't know to what extent that's true in Germany or France, but American culture and media is what we consume a lot of. It's true for that as well. Just the whole, you'll call one mullah, you'll call one sadhu, and you'll just get them fight with each other. Both will be the worst representations of their
Mhm.
religions, but that is what basically you're competing with reality TV, and it's cheaper. Big Boss may have 70 cameras, you have just 5, and you can still create that kind of disgusting kind of conversations and engagement and say, "Okay, we'll rake it in." So it's not even journalism; it's a reality show. But you do that, the damage it does to people who think they're consuming news is significant, and you do that to make certain political masters happy, and that is a huge disservice to news. It's a huge disservice to journalists, and I know a lot of young journalists who are very disillusioned. I mean, I get so many texts and emails from people who are sitting in these newsrooms saying, "Please get me out of here," and I feel heartbroken. There's so many people who came in to do journalism who want jobs, but these are the only jobs available. So I mean, yeah.
Media in Pakistan has always been state controlled. From 2018, we saw the same pageization with media and the establishment. Media was muzzled. Now that the establishment is against PTI, muzzled on the other side. But even in India, over the past decade, we're seeing this idea of Godi media. Why do you think that's prevalent? Is it just saying truth to power is dangerous, or is it because it sells? Is it easier to get ads? Is it that the populace is behind Modi, or is it
All those
made of
things,
all
but
of those?
all those things, but most importantly, Sarkari ads. You'll need to have me back for a 1 hour podcast on this whole revenue model, because I can go on and on about this whole, the incentives are lined up all inaccurately. It is a classic case of market failure where more brands have not made a better product. It has not led to more optimization of resources. Oh, I mean, I could just go on, but yes, it is all those things you said and some more, which is why what makes it, what it is. But it's a very, very long, complicated answer. The ad-funded model where your eyeballs are competing with reality shows. Earlier, if you wanted news, you bought a newspaper. You want to be entertained, you went to the cinema. There was a very different space, a different product to get a different outcome, or to satiate a different desire. Now, this one instrument, so completely dissimilar things are competing for the same dollars. Earlier, the news was not competing for Jumma Chumma Lele. Now you are competing for the same. So it's very complicated. The market has.
Negatives की जगह पॉजिटिव बात करते हैं. न्यूज लॉन्ड्री का alternative financial model, I've quoted it a bunch of times to journalists here in an attempt to get them to emulate it. For people who are listening, or journalists especially in Pakistan who might be listening to this, what is the model? How can they emulate it? And does it financially work?
Well, it works at, you can't scale up as fast as you'd like unless you are funded. You have investors, and investors tend to not be so excited about news for a variety of reasons, especially in countries like Pakistan and India. But I think to begin with, if you have some crutch of being able to subsidize it somehow with whatever your other business is, so that you don't have to spend a lot of money, once you achieve that critical mass of first 2,000 people who are paying you, see, you don't need millions and 10 million viewership, or we don't go for traffic, because traffic of 5 million to 10 million, 10 million to 20 million is not going to make our team grow, because we don't take ads. We've turned off ads on our YouTube because it doesn't even make sense financially, and I can get into that if we talk about the entire revenue model. The CPI used to be whatever, $400, 350, $400 per thousand views 10 years ago. Today it's what, 50, 40, 35 rupees. Google ads, which was 120, $140, today 17 rupees, 15 rupees. The amount of hits you'll have to get is, so I mean, it's, even the arithmetic doesn't work. The first 2,000 people will give you enough resources to create content. I want to correct myself, to create news stories, because content is a different thing. To create news stories which give you the credibility for the next 1,000 to the next 1,000. So it's a slow step up. It's going to be very, very difficult. I'm not saying impossible. It's going to be difficult in societies like India and Pakistan. A, because our purchasing power per capita income is a fraction of what it is in Western countries, where this model is very effective. I had the founder of their correspondent at the Media Rumble at our event a few years ago. When he started, he like, he could understand, like, what do you mean people will not pay? He could not understand people will not pay. Like, he and about, I think, a dozen journalists started this, and the first week I think they got some $3-4 million यूरो जो भी है. अभी वहां देते हैं लोग, यार उनके पास पैसे हैं. यहाँ लोगों के पास वैसे ही पैसे नहीं है. The few who have money, as a percentage, out of that, most of them don't give a shit about news. And the ones who do may not. So as a percentage of the country, it's a small number, but because purely we have so many people, in absolute numbers, it's not so small. And I think messaging is important. You got to message it that this is why it matters. I think Newslaundry, from the beginning, we did not hedge our bets. We didn't say, "Hum ad bhi lenge." So we said, when the public pays, the public is served. And you got to take an absolute position on that. Later, you can hedge and figure out what is the best model, but you have to take your subscribers and supporters along and be able to explain to them why this matters, why you have to do this. I think you have to ask and ask again and again. And before we started Newslaundry, it's one of those serendipity, you just, things fall into place. I happen to have seen this TED talk by Amanda Palmer on the art of asking. She launched her career not by some big Sony music or someone giving her money, just people who contributed money so that she could do concerts from one place to the other. Someone would give a van, someone would give a hall, someone would give the audio equipment. And how she became this international star by just asking people for money. And what I say is that, and I tell the reporters, because some of them are awkward. They don't like to ask. Does your doctor ever feel awkward asking for money? Does your lawyer? Does your teacher? We are in that profession. We are in the zone of lawyers, doctors, teachers. You don't have to say, "I'm doing you a favor." But at the same time, you don't have to be embarrassed. You should be more embarrassed asking, Patanjali or government or Adani or Ambani for ads than asking your viewer. And this is, I mean, there's so many trolls, of course, like they think it fucking makes me shit of a difference that, अबे भिख मंगे, अबे तू तो मांग रहा है. मैंने कहा, बेटा, मैं जिनसे मांग रहा हूँ, कल लोग मुझे ये नहीं बोलेंगे मैंने बंगले पे आके बताना क्या स्टोरी की थी. तुम्हारे न्यूज सोर्स जिनसे मांग रहे हैं ना, कल लोग फोन करके बोले तुम्हारी सारी टीम आएगी यहाँ पर भंगड़ा करेगी, वो करेंगे. मेरे सब्सक्राइबर ये मांगेंगे नहीं, मांगेंगे भी तो बोलूंगा मैं नहीं करूंगा बॉस। तुम जैसे 10, 12, 15 हजार है मेरे पास, तुम में से 400 अगर ऐसी बात करें, 400 और बोलेंगे नहीं। लेकिन एडवर्टाइजिंग में तुम्हारे 4 मास्टर हैं, भीख वहां से मांग रहे हो तुम, हम नहीं मांग रहे। डॉक्टर आपसे भीख नहीं मांगता, टीचर आपसे भीख नहीं मांगता। तो मैं तो कहता हूं यू शुड नॉट बी सेल्फ कॉन्शियस व्हेन यू आस्क पीपल टू पे।
Obviously, you're not beholden to a single subscriber, but do you have you ever thought about being beholden to the subscriber base? अभी जो वो जैद यूनिस वाली पॉडकास्ट थी वो इंडिया में उसको बहुत ट्रैक्शन मिली because he was praising Modi and the technology and the economy, so we got a lot of Modi supporters on the podcast. And then ये बहुत easy मेरे लिए मॉडल है, अगर मैं हर हफ्ते एक पाकिस्तान में बैठा प्रेजिंग मोदी पॉडकास्ट करूँ वो हर हफ्ते वायरल जाएगी, बहुत पैसा आएगा. But I mean, I didn't fall into that trap. Right? We're still critical of Modi, and we still get abused by the same people who are praising us for that podcast. But कहीं ना कहीं जहन में तो आता होगा ना कि यार ये मेरा collective base बन गया है. Whether
I
that's
don't
critical of Imran Khan, whether that's critical of Modi, how does one not fall into that trap of chasing those clicks and chasing more of the same tribe?
I think the people who could fall into that trap may be people who are at a scale of running a YouTube channel. It depends on what is your, where are you going with this? What is your final destination? For us, Newslaundry's final destination to have an organization that is known for its reporters, ground reports, and journalism. Today, I'm not that relevant to Newslaundry. The faces of Newslaundry are Basant, are Manisha, are Atul, are wonderful reporters like Sumedha, Prateek. We have fantastic reporters. Anmol, he does an amazing job. These guys, if I vanish from the scene, Newslaundry is still fine. People are not paying Abhinandan Sekhri. They are paying Newslaundry for our reporting. They were paying Abhinandan Sekhri 8 years ago for my face and my cheekiness and how I interviewed. Today, no one gives a shit about that, man. So if I want to run a YouTube channel, you're right. I have to pander. But I'm not trying to run a YouTube channel. I'm trying to run an organization that does journalism. And for a journalistic organization, that will not work. Economics doesn't work. You will need to get 10 billion hits to be able to get enough money to fund 5 stories. मैं बता रहा था ना, सीपीआई मतलब क्या होता था, 400 रुपए, आज क्या है,
क्या है
50 रुपए.
सब्सक्रिप्शन न्यूज लॉन्ड्री की?
uh, if you log in from India, you get a 300 rupee and a 1000 rupee option. If you log in from overseas, you only get the 10,000 rupee annual option. And we will probably make it even more, this thing dollars में कर देंगे so that people can pay more. But that is typically what it is right now.
असली क्या है, कितने सब्सक्राइबर्स?
अभी हमारे करीब 14,000 होंगे, 14, 14,500 होंगे पेइंग सब्सक्राइबर्स. क्योंकि जब मैं सब्सक्राइबर बोलता हूँ, कई लोग बोलते हैं बस 14 सब्सक्राइबर है यूट्यूब पे. मैंने कहा यूट्यूब पे 1.8 मिलियन है. हमारे लिए जिनको हम सब्सक्राइबर बोलते हैं, हम सब्सक्राइबर उनको बोलते हैं जो हमें पैसा देता है. Those are subscribers.
500 people who ask questions. I'm going to try and run through as many as I can. तो ये rapid fire में कर लेते हैं. What is your view of secularism?
Is this going live?
No, no. It's I
अच्छा,
put it up ना, उस पे 500
क्या
गालियां और 500 सवाल आए थे. लोगों ने भी 500 सवाल भेज दिए. I'm going to try and run through as many as I can. Karan Johar, rapid fire. What is your view of secularism?
I think it's a very important principle and value to have. And if you don't have that value as a very important part of your worldview, it is a question of time before you will want to finish everybody except yourself. It is a very insular, even for self preservation. If you don't have that value, don't expect much out of any civilization that you hope to be a part of.
How will it affect the social fabric of Indian society if Modi loses in 2024?
Well, I don't think one election, win or loss, changes the fabric of society in such a profound way. It takes a while. Um, but I think more important than a Modi winning or losing, I think it is uh, the entire gamut of what constitutes pop culture determines which way society moves. In that sense, I think it could kind of, people may have the courage to say a lot more than they have right now. But that entire, turbulence between ideas and ideologies will continue in a country like India. I don't think that is going anywhere in a hurry.
What he learned under Madhu Trehan, and why is Madhu Trehan so rarely seen on News Laundry?
Well, because Madhu's retired, I think 3 or 4 years ago. I have learned journalism from Madhu Trehan, of I'm very proud. I think Madhu is a rock star. I don't think there's any bigger name in Indian journalism than her. I think the only reason she is not quoted as liberally and is not celebrated is A, she was ever always reluctant to receive awards. She said, I don't want this award, I wouldn't want that award, I don't, journalists should not accept awards. So, so that's why I think people said, sure, let's not give her. But I think she is to journalism what Amitabh Bachchan is to Bollywood. I don't think today's generation understands A, that they don't realize that she is the one who was the founder of India today. She's the founder of TV today. All this इंडिया टुडे एंड आज तक जिस जिस किले में वो बैठे हैं उसकी नींव मधु ने रखी है. People don't realize what a big name she was in the 80s. Um, so yeah, and she's an amazing person. I mean, there are very few people like her, and I could go on and on. Uh, but and you don't see her now because she's retired, and but we still meet regularly. She keeps giving me advice on you know what kind of stories are important, which way the news space is going, etc., etc. She's full of ideas, man, and she's been full of ideas for the last 40 years. It's amazing.
One wonder who's the Rekha of journalism. कोई
Hmm?
lesson तो है ना, कोई lesson के ये lesson था that other people can also take.
From Madhu,
Yeah.
always be combative. She is forever combative. Whoever comes, whoever goes. She's that's why I think I look up to her so much because even I'm very combative. She won't back off from a fight. I like that about
Please do ask him about his philosophy on Karere Channa Karera.
her. Karare chane. I used to on a show used to copy Rahul Shivshankar. He was a primetime anchor of Times now. So his voice, he'd anchor in this voice like karare chane, karare lele, karare le. So I do that little thing. So it became popular. In fact, where's my mug? We even have these karare chane mugs, which are very popular.
About his recent comments about Chandrayaan 3 in the light of Russia sending its moon mission and the US preparing to do so as well.
We had a podcast I think 2 3 weeks ago about the Chandrayaan going. So it was I think 1.5 hour 2 hour podcast. So in fact, that was Charcha, which is Atul's podcast. He's the host. So he was asking everybody, "What is your view?" So actually, I had a whatever 10-minute intervention where I said I don't have a position on it, and in that context, I had said, there could be people who say X, people who say Y, and from the limited understanding that I have, people stopped going to the moon in the 60s or 70s whenever the last, bit was sent. I think it was 70s. Um, so, I mean, has anything good come out of it? And my position is still the same. It's ambivalent. I mean, I don't. No one has been able to convince me of some big benefit that will come out of it. And at the same time, like the internet was a creation of the military. So you could say that something as destructive as the army created, the military, US military created something that has benefited so many. So maybe there are some spin-off benefits that come out of any space program. Uh, so similarly, I think certain technology are created for this and that can be used for something else. So, like I said, I don't have a very firm position on whether it's good or bad or Russia should go or anyone should go. But to the best of my understanding,
For making fun of it, Prakash,
sorry.
some actor Prakash who got an FIR against him for making fun of it.
Yeah. He had put out a cartoon which is basically a Mallu tea seller on the moon. And it's a very old joke. Ki what did Neil Armstrong see when he went to the moon? So if you're a Punjabi, the joke is he saw Santa Singh with his dhaba. And if you're a South Indian, the joke was you saw Mallu tea stall. So I mean, you could. So he was showing a Mallu. It's a very old joke. So I really don't know why it's this. But we live in an age where वही तो ना such टुच्चा टुच्चा things फायर हो रही है. मतलब लोग मर रहे हैं, लोग बच्चों को अटैक हो रहा है, रेप्स हो रहे हैं, उस पर एफआईआर ही नहीं होती. किसी ने एक जोक मतलब that is this is the and the thing is that See, two is it energizes the Twitter trolls. And some of them actually think it makes a difference to the lives of a Prakash Raj or even to a small person like me. It makes no difference at all. But yet, what it does is it activates a parallel kind of thing that of fire karo, ye karo. I'm under no illusion that Prakash Raj will go to jail for that. It won't happen. But because he is high profile, it can be used to tell everybody, shh, you watch it.
Ask him why profound Indian journalism bent backwards in the face of state might with little or no resistance to offer. I think we've discussed that. Eh? You want to add
Yeah.
something? Why did he
Now,
part ways with Anand Ranganathan?
I didn't part ways with him. He was a consulting editor here. And I mean, I don't want to get into the entire sordid
Okay,
saga.
next, a question about economics of running an online news portal and what besides passion keeps it going. It would be good to know the logistics and non-editorial work that occurs behind the scenes in addition.
This is very long. I've discussed it briefly with you, but I have also discussed in some detail with Avlok Nagar on Scoop Whoop. He had done an interview with me. I think it was called Unscripted. Um, so you can check that out. I mean, it'll take me a long time to explain the economics, what I do, why I do, etc., etc. But it is, uh, you know, I mean, there are many moving parts. Yeah.
Maybe we can have you again sometime to discuss all of this. We've seen News Laundry being persecuted over the last years by ED. Despite that, what are the bright spots you see for media in India, or is it all gloom?
No, I see bright spots. It was not ED, it is the IT department, income tax. I still keep getting notices, etc. But I think there are enough bright spots. There are many people who want to, support journalism. There are many people who think it's important. There are many people who want to support you but are too scared to speak, who are there in legacy media outfits. So I'm generally an optimist. So I always see the bright side, and I love combat. So yeah, I'm okay with it.
Ask him about the news click fiasco. What's the news click fiasco?
NewsClick is a portal. I mean, New York Times did a story. It became a huge issue. It was taken up in Parliament. It has become a political hot potato. But the New York Times story did not reveal anything that wasn't already there. They had also been raided by the IT on where they got their funds, etc. from, and I mean, that is carrying on. But the New York Times report suddenly gave it a new fillip where it became a media event. But it's started like 3 years ago. Nothing new has really happened as such.
What do you think of news medias being compelled to, which I think should happen? They should let everybody know. It should be public who's funding news organizations. I think that should be public information.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it should be public. I think what they add, government ads come, I think because that should be covered under RTI because that's tax-paying citizens' money. We should be told that this much money has gone to this channel, this much money. One should not have to do investigative journalism for that. So I absolutely agree that where the revenue is coming from, it should be transparent.
Please ask him his views on Meghnad leaving News Laundry and whom does he think is the journalist in India who researches a lot and is precise before publishing or broadcasting.
Well, Meghnad had moved it wasn't a news platform, it was a general podcast platform called IVM. Um, but I think there are many journalists and platforms who actually really are very robust in their analysis, their critique, their data gathering, etc. I mean, I will not take one or two names, but there are a lot of horrible journalists, but there are many good ones as well. Uh, yeah.
Okay, News Laundry always has a satirical take on politicians, media, and other powerful people. How do they deal with the pressure exerted on them by these giants?
Part of the deal, yeah. Par for the course. I think it's the job of the leadership of any organization to uh, make sure that the pressure is not felt by the reporters, because they should be able to do what they do without fear or favor. So the job of management is to absorb that basically, and that is what I think all management should do.
I used to write satire for Dawn, Express, Friday Times. Last I was writing for the Herald. फिर वो मैगजीन ही बंद हो गया.
Oh,
कुछ
really?
वो बड़े मसले मसाइल भी हुए थे. So how does one do satire in a world that is this ridiculous? Because a lot of times I used to write satirical pieces और 3 महीने बाद वो हो जाता था. And
Correct.
I can't out ridicule reality at this point, which is why I stopped writing. So, what's your take on doing satire in an increasingly ridiculous reality that we live in?
Well, I think content is for forming the basis of satire is all around us. I think it makes us think a little harder, figure out formats that are a little more clever. Uh, but I think there is a lot more that can be done. It's just a little harder to do it. So, it challenges your creativity in ways where it was a little easier earlier because things are not as bizarre and ridiculous as they are now. So yeah, I think there are, for example, I still find Anwar Maqsood's loose talk phenomenal. I had discovered it years ago, and I used to watch it regularly. Uh, and that tradition of political satire was way more evolved in Pakistan back then than it was here. There was a tradition of it, which you saw a lot of. But I mean, I don't know how the military rule and the extremists taking over has affected it. I mean, I'm sure it has in some way or the other.
We
But
needed to be cleverer because of the restrictions. And we said something recently which was critical of Anwar Maqsood, so I was trolled for that as well. That doesn't mean I'm not a fan of loose talk.
sure,
And
exactly. I get what you're saying. You
50-50.
you're very critical of people who you also
Yeah.
appreciate for the other stuff. Yeah.
But I think satirists in Pakistan needed to be much cleverer back because of the restrictions, which is why the art that was produced was much better. It needed to be to avoid arrest. It needed to be more subtle. So it stands the test of time. That's at least how I see it.
But just out
How
of curiosity, what was your critical comment on Anwar Maqsood?
uh,
I
so
have one I have one critique of him, which is
I
significant, but I
I think it's often misattributed to Terry Pratchett. So I'm not sure if he said that or not, but he said uh, satire is punching up if you're already making fun of the marginalized. That's not satire. So I think oftentimes Anwar Maqsood is guilty of posing up to the establishment and punching down on marginalized communities, and a lot of his jokes rely on racist stereotypes. So
sure.
even during Loose Talk, there is one episode in which Moin Akhtar is
Bangladeshi
dressed up
cricketer.
as a Bengali and they're mocking Bangladesh. So, like you said, context matters, right? So, in a society which Pakistan did 1971 to Bangladesh, and the history
Right.
of to put
Yeah.
an
That was stereotype.
elitist
I agree with you.
Pakistani to sit and mock Bengalis in a society like Pakistan,
Yeah.
it's punching way down from an
I,
ivory tower.
I
And
agree.
Anwar Maqsood often has been guilty of doing that. That does not negate all the other work that he's done. He's a product of his
Sure.
time. But one can criticize his positionality in a lot of things he's said while appreciating a lot of his work. But I think this nuance is lost on a lot of people who worship heroes.
Yeah, also I think one thing that came through in his satire, which he was funny. Like for example, I'm a huge fan of Bill Maher, but do I agree with everything he says? No, I think sometimes he's outright ridiculous. And I think because of his age catching up with him, he's becoming more and more defensive about many of his positions that make him say things which are a bit bizarre. But as a body of work, he's got an amazing body of work. But on Anwar Maqsood, one thing that I think came through in much of his work is I found him. I figured in real life he'd be a real snob and elitism at a level which his making fun of people who did not know literature and Urdu the way he thought people should know. I somehow got that from his satire, that he is a privileged elitist, but I don't know if that's true.
And I don't know him personally, but you might get the same feeling from David. But Larry David's comedy is not that, right? So Anwar Masood made one video for his YouTube channel where he pretended to be the Sindhi who was very jahil, who was very unpad, and he was mocking the Sindhi accent. And then he had to also apologize for that. Maybe in 2023, 2022, these things are a lot more jarring, but these things were a lot more acceptable 10 years ago, 20 years ago, where they were not questioned. So some people did not like the fact that we were questioning that. But a
Right,
lot
right.
of this comedy, and not just his, he's a product of his time, as
Sure,
does Umar Sharif's. Umar Sharif's comedy is also very sexist. That does not mean Umar Sharif was not a phenomenal comedian. He's really
sure.
funny. A lot of the jokes were sexist. Both these things can be true at the same time.
Coexist, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, Dave. I think Dave Chappelle is the greatest living stand-up comedian. Who I feel a lot of the jokes are transphobic. 100%. Both these things are true.
Mm. Right.
How does he deal with his own countrymen calling him anti-national?
I really don't care. It's par for the course.
What does he think about the print? I think it. I like it more than News Laundry or The Wire because they give more information and less opinion.
Well, the print has, I think, anything from 150 to 200 pieces that go up a day. We probably have 10. So it's a different kind of print is like a newspaper. The volume of stuff that it churns out is 10 to 15 times ours.
Do you feel there's a difference between political activism and political journalism? Do you feel political activism is masking as political journalism these days?
You know, again, that's a kind of complicated answer is required for that question. But I think the lines often get blurred, and one should be aware that as a journalist, you're not an activist. But what is the definition of activist also will determine what is your position on this. An activist in today's day and age has kind of become this professional or this, it is this lifestyle choice. I have, when I was younger, described activism as just getting involved with the world around you. You can be a chartered accountant, and activism is a part of your job. To do your accounts honestly, you can be a actor, and activism is part of your job. So, in one sense of how I define or how I saw activism, we are all doing what we're doing to make things better. Whether it is laying roads, whether it is balancing books, whether it's making art, or whether it's doing journalism. But to become a cheerleader for an ideology becomes a bit complicated. And it could compromise journalism, but this is not a black and white answer. It is nuanced. I think journalism has a certain element of activism in it, but are you an activist? That depends on what you consider an activist. I mean, am I running an NGO and my salary comes from that? Or am I a professional who's trying to make the world better through my work? It's, it's
What are his thoughts on the challenges faced by independent media organizations in India, especially in terms of funding and sustainability? How does he ensure that News Laundry maintains editorial independence and integrity, especially when covering politically sensitive topics?
I mean, we discussed that briefly during this, so I think
More
that's
or less the questions हमने around those discuss कर लिया. This is maybe a fun question to end it on. You have to ask him about his interview with Vivek Agnihotri, his love for Punjabi music. बाकी तो चीजें हम discuss करें.
so. Yeah, that was an interesting interview, and look at the times we live in. That interview, went viral, whereas we've done a lot more smarter interviews. But I mean, yeah, Vivek Agnihotri became this pop culture phenomenon. He used media very well to create a niche and an image of himself. I think to an extent we kind of were able to unmask just how actually ignorant he is, and where he comes from. But it was a fun interview. I mean, funnily enough, most people, when they see that interview and they see how on Twitter he went at me and all that, they would think after the interview we were very angry. After the interview, he came up, we had lunch, we sat together, we chatted. And it is only when the interview went online and he realized how stupid he looked is when he suddenly became so angry. When he did it, he didn't realize he had made such a fool of himself. You see, he's that foolish until it is shown to him, and he didn't even realize. So yeah, sorry.
Two people have done that to me. ये podcast के बाद चाय पे बैठे हैं 3-4 घंटे chill किया है. Once the podcast goes up and people say things, then they're like, "Oh, मेरे से." So, what
Yeah, yeah.
questions did you have for me?
I had a question, and you can cut this out if it's
नहीं
not,
नहीं.
because we've had a frank chat, and because I'm, just amazed at how honestly you can discuss things. I always, when I'd come to Lahore also, um, people were very sweet, and we had come for the Rafi Peer Performing Arts Festival, and that whole thing of, you know, there was no you're from India, and although Kargil had happened less than 3-4 years when I had come, 99 2000 had happened. I'd come then 2003 or 4. You know, so I used to stay away from talking about India versus Pakistan because I thought that always took a otherwise wonderful evening downhill. Because when you scratch the surface, everyone had a predictable response. And in my head, what I figured is because some of those people I was fairly friendly with, it is very difficult to reconcile for a young person of being Pakistani, being proud of your Pakistani identity, but yet saying that, what happened was a mistake. That whole desire for a country based on, because then you're questioning your identity. It's like basically if you've grown up, it's like a communist from the childhood. Suddenly they come into adulthood and they say, what, the market makes sense. You cannot like debunk your entire existence or any ideology, like someone who's from the RSS suddenly saying that, what, Muslims are great, man. We should have one of them leading the RSS. You know what? It you then you question your own identity. Do you think that's a thing? Do you
Don't you think, isn't that true for everybody? If an American is now combating the idea of what Christopher Columbus did, and America is built on first the genocide of the first Americans and then slavery, how do you combat or how do you grapple with the contradiction that you're a proud American and you're going to support America in games and
no,
wars?
no, I'm not
At
talking
the same
about.
time, the ethos of your country is slavery and genocide. It's the same with Canada, where they wiped out the First Nations to build Canada. In Australia, they wiped out the Aborigines. France talks about the French Revolution, but France is built on colonialism in Africa. So there is a dark history of every single country, and one doesn't need to be maybe proud of every single thing that's done in the name of your country.
No,
I'll
no,
go even.
I'm not talking about acts of your founders. I'm talking about the act of coming into existence. That's what I'm saying. Your identity. I'm not saying, of course, they can. You can be very critical of what um, they did to the Americans. When they actually got there. So many horrible things that have happened. I'm talking about, but they can say, but we founded a country and this country has done well for itself. The idea that we should found this country and we did a lot of injustices, a lot of horrible things happen, but what has emerged is a country where civil rights is a thing, a Martin Luther King, and it is a country where we are powerful, another country can say something else. The fact that we will form a country because we cannot survive in an India together, but that the very act of founding that country being considered maybe we should have just been one India. That is what I'm talking about.
These are historically incidental. I mean, it's the whole idea of imagined communities and Benedict Anderson, right? Anytime anybody notions to a moment in past to whether fall onto notions of Akhand Bharat or a greater Pakistan or a South Asian identity that's always existed, these notions of borders and communities has always been fluid. In fact, the whole idea of nation states is a lot more recent than one would think. It's that whole Westphalian idea. So a nation state, I see it as being historically incidental, as opposed to what Pakistan would like to project as if it was the destiny when the first Muslim came to this region for Pakistan to exist, or for maybe somebody in India to think that there would one day be an Akhand Bharat where all of this territory is actually Pakistan, is actually India. Maybe somebody from Afghanistan would lay claim to KP because they're culturally similar. So these notions of what your nation should have been and these myths of greatness maybe exist in the minds of some people. Those are not myths that one needs to necessarily uh, internalize for you to feel proud of your country, right? If Pakistan's playing in the World Cup, I'm supporting them. I'm going insane. It's going to affect my life personally. But does that mean if I celebrate Shaheen Afridi taking a wicket, I'm necessarily celebrating what happened in 1971 or every single ill that's been done and continues to be done in the name of the state of Pakistan? I don't think it's that singular or it's that unified in terms of your identity. And the whole notion of the Pakistani identity, my problem is the state has always projected it to be very singular. And that's happened at the expense of the whole idea of multiple identities, which as we discussed, I think the whole idea of pan India is what kept India together. It might seem uh, contradictory that once you celebrate diversity, the chances of unity are a lot more as opposed to trying to push a unified idea of a Pakistani. So I've challenged that notion a lot. And I don't personally feel that there's a contradiction that, well, how can you celebrate being a Pakistani when you're conscious of what's been done in the name of Pakistan? It's the same for most countries. The history of mankind or humanity is littered with dead bodies. sometimes done in the name of religion, sometimes done in the name of nation.
Great. Thanks, man.
Thank
Good.
you. Hopefully, for all the things that you said, कि ये घंटे घंटे के answer है, I can bother you in a few months again
Yeah,
and
sure.
get those घंटे घंटे के answers for that.
Yeah, and let's see what are the repercussions of talking to a Chinese podcast, of talking to a Pakistani podcaster. Will it suddenly be from China? I have become a Pakistani agent, right? It would be interesting to see how the trolls on Twitter take to this.
Already शुरू हो चुकी है today. मैंने आज
Huh?
अभी खोला Twitter and I was like ये क्या हो गया? But you can't let trolls be.
But thank you so much, man. Wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the work that you do, and thank you for listening. Yeah.
See you, man.